Wait, before you scroll past this, give me just a moment, because what I'm about to tell you starts like an ordinary marriage story and turns into something no one expects. If you enjoy intense, real lifestyle stories that keep your thinking long after the end, subscribe now so you don't miss what unfolds. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Morning, afternoon, or late at night? I want to know who's here with me. My name is Rachel Carter, and until one ordinary Tuesday morning, I was invisible. I lived in Brooklyn, New York, in a small, clean apartment that smelled like laundry detergent and kid snacks. My husband, Daniel Carter, ran a construction and development firm out of Manhattan. He liked to call himself a self-made man. I believed him. He was my first love, the only man I'd ever trusted completely. We'd been married 5 years and had a 4-year-old son, Ethan, who was the center of my universe. After Ethan was born, I quit my marketing job to stay home. Daniel said it made sense. He said I was lucky to be able to focus on our family while he carried the pressure of work. He left early, came home late, and even weekends were swallowed by clients and emergencies. Money was always tight, according to him. The company was still growing. Everything had to be reinvested. I never questioned it. I thought trust was love. That Tuesday started like every other. Oatmeal on the stove, Ethan lining up his toy cars on the rug. While cleaning the kitchen, I noticed a Mega Millions ticket stuck under my grocery list on the fridge. I'd bought it the night before during a heavy rainstorm at a small corner store near Flatbush Avenue. The cashier, an older woman with tired eyes, had smiled and said, "You never know." I don't know why, but something told me to check it. I sat on the kitchen floor and opened the lottery app on my phone. My heart skipped when the first numbers matched. Then more. My hands went cold when I saw the final number. I dropped the phone. $50 million. I didn't scream. I didn't jump. I felt dizzy, like the air had been knocked out of me. Then the thoughts came rushing in. Ethan's future, no more budgeting every dollar, no more apologizing for needing things, no more watching my husband drown in stress. Daniel would finally be free. We would finally be happy. I grabbed my purse, carefully zipped the ticket into an inner pocket, lifted Ethan into my arms, and ordered a ride straight to Daniel's office near Times Square. I wanted to see his face when I told him. I wanted to be the reason his life changed forever. The receptionist smiled when she saw me. "Hey, Rachel, here to see Daniel?" "Yes," I said, my voice shaking with excitement. "But don't tell him. I want to surprise him." She hesitated, then nodded, his doors a little open. My heart was racing as I walked down the hallway. This was it, the moment everything turned around. I raised my hand to knock, and then I heard a woman laugh. Soft, intimate, too close. I froze. Ethan shifted in my arms and I gently pressed his face into my shoulder. Inside the office, I heard Daniel's voice, the same voice that whispered to me at night, the same voice that once promised me forever. "Relax," he said calmly. "I just need time to handle my wife. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her. She always does." The woman giggled. "And then we're free?" "Yes," Daniel replied. "Divorce. Clean. She'll walk away with nothing." My chest tightened. My knees nearly gave out. I stood there, silent, as they continued talking about me, about money, about how easy it would be to erase my life. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I smiled, because standing there in a quiet Manhattan hallway, holding my son with a lottery ticket worth $50 million hidden in my purse, I understood something crystal clear. Daniel thought I was weak. He thought I was clueless. He thought I had nothing. He had no idea how wrong he was. I stepped back quietly, careful not to make a sound. The elevator ride down felt endless. In the lobby, the receptionist glanced up again. "Did you see him?" I forced a calm smile. "I forgot something at home. I'll come back another day." Outside, the city moved like nothing had happened. Taxis honked, tourists laughed, The world didn't know my marriage had just died behind a half-closed door. As the car pulled away, my hands began to shake, not from fear, but from clarity. That money wasn't just luck anymore. It was protection. It was power. It was the difference between being destroyed and taking control. Daniel thought he was setting a trap. He didn't realize he was standing inside one. I didn't go home after that. Instead, I told the driver to keep driving, past familiar streets, past the daycare, past everything that still felt like my old life. Ethan had fallen asleep against my chest, his breathing slow and warm, completely unaware that his world had just cracked in half. I stared out the window as New York rushed by, and for the first time in years, my mind wasn't filled with worry or doubt. It was sharp, focused, almost frighteningly calm. I replayed Daniel's words over and over. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her. She'll walk away with nothing. He had said it with certainty, with practice. That meant this wasn't new. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was a plan, a carefully built one, and plans leave traces. I finally told the driver to stop near Prospect Park. I needed air. I needed space to think. I sat on a bench, Ethan still asleep, and pulled the lottery ticket out just enough to see the numbers. It felt unreal in my hand, like it might disappear if I stared too long. $50 million. If Daniel found out, he would take it, one way or another. I knew that now with absolute certainty. Love had blinded me before. It wouldn't again. I went home only when it was dark. Daniel's car wasn't there. I moved quietly, like a guest in my own apartment. I bathed Ethan, fed him, tucked him into bed, and sat beside him longer than usual, watching his chest rise and fall. He trusted me completely. That trust was heavier than any fear I felt. When Daniel finally came home, it was close to midnight. I heard his keys, his shoes kicking off, the familiar sound of his routine. He walked into the bedroom like nothing had happened. "Hey," he said casually, "long day?" I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Same." He didn't notice my red eyes, or if he did, he didn't care. He climbed into bed, turned away from me, and was asleep within minutes. I lay there awake all night. The next morning, I became exactly who Daniel thought I was. I made his coffee, I packed his lunch, I kissed him goodbye at the door and told him to drive safe. My voice was soft, my smile was gentle. Perfect. As soon as he left, I started looking. I checked drawers I had never opened before, old folders, a locked filing cabinet I didn't even know we owned. I didn't break into anything, not yet, but I memorized everything, the brands, the locks, the names. That afternoon, I took Ethan to his nap, then called Daniel's office pretending to be confused. "Hi," I said sweetly, "this is Rachel. I'm trying to update some paperwork for insurance. Do you know who handles accounting?" The receptionist didn't hesitate. "Oh, that would be Melissa Grant." I wrote the name down. That night, Daniel came home irritated. He complained about cash flow, about delays, about how people didn't understand how hard he worked. I nodded sympathetically, playing my role so well I almost scared myself. A few days later, he dropped the first hint. "Things are getting bad," he said one evening, rubbing his temples. "Really bad." My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. "How bad?" "There might be debt," he sighed. "If the company goes under, it could affect us." I reached for his hand. "We'll get through it." He watched my face carefully, as if measuring how much fear he could feed me next. And then, a week later, I heard it. "Rachel," he said gently, "if things get worse, we might need to talk to a lawyer just to understand our options." There it was. That night, after he fell asleep, I went into the bathroom and locked the door. My reflection stared back at me, pale, tired, but no longer naive. I pulled out my phone and searched for something I never thought I'd need: how to claim lottery winnings anonymously in New York. What I read made my stomach drop. There were rules, deadlines, taxes, risks, and one terrifying truth. If I claimed the money in my own name while still married, Daniel could legally touch it. I slid down onto the bathroom floor, my back against the cold tile, and closed my eyes. I needed someone I could trust completely. Only one person came to mind: my mother. She lived in upstate New York, quiet, private, and fiercely loyal. She never liked Daniel. She called him too polished from the start. The next morning, I called her. "Mom," I said softly, "I need to come see you today." She heard something in my voice and didn't ask questions. "Bring Ethan. I'll be waiting." Daniel didn't object when I told him. In fact, he looked relieved. "Go rest," he said. "You've been stressed." I smiled. If he only knew. As the train pulled away from the city, I watched the skyline shrink and felt something settle inside me. This wasn't panic anymore. This was preparation. Daniel thought I was walking into his trap, but I was already building one of my own. My mother's house sat at the edge of a quiet town in upstate New York, the kind of place where nights were actually dark and neighbors still waved, even if they didn't know your name. The moment I stepped inside, something in my chest loosened. It smelled like soup and clean laundry. Safety. She took one look at my face and didn't smile. "Something's wrong," she said quietly. I didn't answer right away. I put Ethan down with his toys, waited until he was distracted, then followed my mother into the kitchen. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the counter. "Mom," I whispered, "I need you to promise me something before I say anything else." Her eyes sharpened. "You don't ask for promises unless it's serious." "Please," I said, "you can't tell anyone, not Dad, not your sister, no one." She nodded slowly. "I promise." That was when everything came out. Daniel, the office, the woman, the divorce plan, the way he talked about me like I was disposable. My voice broke more than once, but I didn't stop. I needed her to understand the full weight of it. By the time I finished, her face had gone pale with fury. "That man," she said through clenched teeth, "is poison." Then I reached into my purse. I placed the folded lottery ticket on the table between us. For a long moment, she just stared at it. "What is this?" she asked. "It's real," I said quickly. I checked. Multiple times. $50 million. She looked up at me, searching my face, then back down at the ticket. Her mouth opened, then closed. Finally, she sat down hard in the chair. "Oh my God," she whispered. I told her everything: how I found out, how I heard Daniel, how I realized the money couldn't be in my name yet. I told her why I needed her. "I need you to claim it, in your name, temporarily. I'll give you power of attorney. I'll pay every tax, every fee. I just need it safe, away from him." She didn't answer right away. She picked up the ticket with trembling fingers, like it might burn her. "You're asking me to hold $50 million?" she said. "I'm asking you to help me protect my son," I replied. That did it. She folded the ticket, placed it in her pocket, and looked at me with a strength I hadn't seen since I was a child. The next few days passed in a blur of planning and silence. My mother made calls, appointments were set, lawyers were consulted, carefully, selectively. Ethan played in the backyard, laughing, unaware that his future was being secured one signature at a time. When I returned to Brooklyn, I became even quieter than before. Daniel didn't notice. In fact, he seemed pleased, lighter, more confident. One night over dinner, he finally said it. "I think we should separate." I lowered my fork, letting my hands tremble just enough to sell the shock. "Separate?" I whispered. "It's for the best. The stress, the debt. We're not good for each other anymore." My heart raced, but my voice stayed small. "What about Ethan?" Daniel said, "I'll let you keep him," like he was doing me a favor. "I'm willing to be generous." Generous? I nodded slowly. "If that's what you think is best." His eyes flickered with surprise. He hadn't expected me to agree so easily. 2 days later, he slid the papers across the table. "Just sign," he said. "It'll be quick." I looked at the pages. The language was cold, final. No assets, no support, full custody to me, nothing to him. Exactly what he wanted. I picked up the pen and signed. As the ink dried, Daniel smiled for the first time in weeks. He had no idea that while he was celebrating my surrender, $50 million was already out of his reach, and he had just given me something even more valuable than money: freedom. I moved out 3 days later. Not because Daniel asked me to, but because he assumed I had nowhere else to go. I packed only what fit into 2 suitcases: clothes for Ethan, his favorite blanket, a few toys. I left behind furniture, photos, wedding gifts, anything that tied me to the woman I used to be. Daniel watched from the doorway, arms crossed, impatient. "Make it quick," he said. "The landlord's coming by." I nodded, head lowered, playing my part to perfection. When we stepped outside, Ethan looked up at me. "Mommy, are we going on a trip?" "Yes, baby," I said softly. "A long one." Daniel didn't hug him. He didn't say goodbye. He just closed the door behind us like he was shutting off a light. That night, Ethan and I slept in a small rental studio my mother had arranged under her name. It was temporary, invisible, exactly what I needed. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "It's done." My hands shook as I sat on the edge of the bed and called her. "They verified everything," she said quietly. "The ticket, the numbers, it's real. They're processing it now." I closed my eyes. $50 million. After taxes, it would be less, but still more than enough to change everything. "Rachel," she added, her voice serious, "this stays between us. No banks you shared, no accounts tied to him. We move slow." "I know," I said. "Thank you." I hung up and stared at the wall. Daniel thought I was broke. He thought I was scared. He thought I would disappear quietly. Instead, I started building. The first thing I did was nothing. I stayed invisible. I wore old clothes. I took public transit. I kept Ethan's routine simple. I let Daniel believe his version of the story, that he'd escaped a burden, that he'd won. He texted once, "Make sure you forward any mail that comes." I replied, "Of course." A week later, I saw him for the first time since the divorce, at a grocery store near our old apartment. He looked different, lighter, confident. There was a woman with him, young, polished, wearing heels she wasn't used to yet. She laughed too loudly at something he said. He saw me. For a split second, something flashed across his face, satisfaction. "Rachel," he said, nodding. "Hope you're doing okay." "I am," I replied calmly. He glanced at my clothes, my cart, Ethan sitting quietly beside me. "Good," he said. "Glad you're managing." He walked away without another word. I stood there, heart steady, watching him disappear down the aisle with his arm around her waist. That was the moment I stopped feeling pain. All that was left was resolve. 2 days later, my mother called again. "The money's cleared," she said. "Every dollar accounted for." I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop. I searched for one thing: Daniel's company. Public records, contracts, lawsuits, complaints, names. That's when I saw it. A former business partner, bought out years ago, forced out under financial strain. His name was Marcus Reed. I stared at the screen, reading every article, every footnote, every comment buried deep in forums. Daniel had done this before, and Marcus had lost everything. I leaned back in my chair, my pulse quickening, not with fear, but with recognition. Daniel's pattern was clear now, and patterns could be broken or used. I closed the laptop and looked at Ethan playing on the floor, laughing to himself as he lined up his cars. "This," I whispered, "is for you." Outside, the city moved on, unaware that something had shifted. Daniel thought the story was over, but it had only just begun. I didn't contact Marcus Reed right away. I waited. People like Daniel were predictable. When they thought they'd won, they got careless. They talked too much, they took risks, they stopped watching their backs. And I needed him exactly like that. Relaxed, arrogant, convinced I was finished. So for weeks, I stayed quiet. I focused on Ethan. New routines, new parks, new bedtime stories. I made sure he felt safe, grounded, loved. I didn't want revenge poisoning my home. Whatever I was building had to exist outside of him. At night, after Ethan fell asleep, I worked. I read everything I could about Daniel's company. Old permits, vendor contracts, employee reviews, lawsuits that quietly disappeared. I followed money trails the way you follow cracks in ice, slowly, carefully, always watching where it might break. That's when I noticed something strange. For a company supposedly drowning in debt, Daniel was spending aggressively. New office furniture, a luxury lease, corporate dinners at places I'd never been allowed to step into because it wasn't practical. Debt didn't look like that. I cross-checked timelines. 6 years ago, when Marcus Reed had been forced out, Daniel's company had suddenly lost a major contract. The same month, a new LLC appeared under a different name, registered to a relative of Daniel's. It was subtle, clean on paper, but it was there. I finally reached out to Marcus using a private investigator. No emails, no direct messages, just a request passed through channels that couldn't be traced back to me. He agreed to meet. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe in Queens, far from Daniel's usual territory. Marcus looked older than his photos, thinner, worn down in a way that didn't come from age, but from betrayal. He didn't trust me at first. "Why would my former partner's ex-wife want to talk to me?" he asked. "Because," I said calmly, "because he did the same thing to both of us." That got his attention. I didn't tell him about the money. Not yet. I told him about the divorce, the debt lie, the way Daniel talked about people once he thought they were useless. Marcus laughed once, short, bitter. "That's him," he said. "Always 5 steps ahead, or so he thinks." I slid a folder across the table. He opened it and froze. It wasn't everything, just enough to prove I wasn't guessing. "How did you get this?" he asked. "I listened," I said. "He never thought I mattered." Marcus leaned back, exhaled slowly, and stared at the ceiling. "He ruined me," he said quietly. "Took the company, the contacts, everything. By the time I realized what he'd done, I was buried." I looked him straight in the eyes. "Do you want it back?" He didn't answer right away. People who've lost everything don't jump at hope. They're afraid of it. "I don't want revenge," he said finally. "I want justice." "Good," I replied, "because revenge burns fast. Justice lasts." That was when I told him. Not the full amount, just enough. "I have resources," I said. "Enough to rebuild, enough to compete, enough to expose." Marcus stared at me, disbelief flickering across his face. "You?" he said. "After what he did?" "After what he did," I corrected. "I stopped being afraid." We talked for hours about Daniel's weaknesses, about corners he cut, about how his biggest strength, confidence, was also his blind spot. When we left that cafe, nothing was signed, but something had shifted. Daniel's phone rang that same night. I know because he called me right after. "Rachel," he said, irritation sharp in his voice, "have you been talking about me?" I smiled to myself. Why would I? "People are asking questions," he snapped, "about the company, about old deals." "I wouldn't know anything about that," I said softly. There was a pause. Then he laughed. "Right, of course you wouldn't." He hung up. I sat in the dark, my heart steady. He felt it. He didn't know what it was yet, but he felt the ground shifting beneath him. 2 days later, Marcus called. "I'm in," he said. "But if we do this, we do it clean. No shortcuts." "That's exactly what I want," I replied. That night, I opened a new account under a name that didn't belong to me, and for the first time since my marriage ended, I slept deeply, because the trap was no longer theoretical. It was being built. The company was formed quietly. No announcements, no social media, no glossy press releases, just paperwork, signatures, and a name that meant nothing to anyone yet. Marcus insisted on that. He said visibility was a weapon, but only after the blade was sharp. I agreed. The money moved in stages, small amounts at first, enough to rent a workspace in Long Island City, enough to bring in 2 engineers Marcus trusted with his life. I never showed my face. I never used my real name. To them, I was just an investor who believed in second chances. Daniel didn't know any of this. What he did know was that something wasn't right. He started calling more often, asking questions that pretended to be concern. "How's Ethan? Are you managing okay? You sure you don't need help?" I answered politely, briefly, always calm. That calm irritated him more than anger ever could. One afternoon, he showed up unannounced at the studio apartment. I opened the door just enough to block his view inside. "You look different," he said, scanning me like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Life's quieter," I replied. "That helps." He smirked. "Careful, quiet lives get boring." I met his gaze. "I'm not bored." For a moment, something like doubt crossed his face. He left without another word. 2 weeks later, Marcus sent me a message. "Daniel just lost a supplier." I stared at the screen. "How?" I typed. "He didn't know it yet," Marcus replied, "but they're done with him." The supplier hadn't switched out of loyalty. They switched because they were offered something better. Cleaner contracts, faster turnaround, no intimidation, no threats. Marcus was doing everything Daniel never did. Daniel responded the way he always did, with pressure. He started calling former contacts, demanding explanations, threatening lawsuits, burning bridges he thought he didn't need anymore. Each one lit the fuse a little faster. At home, his life was unraveling too. The woman he'd left me for was no longer smiling. I heard it from a mutual acquaintance who couldn't resist gossip. They fought about money, about his temper, about promises he'd made and couldn't keep. Success had been his glue. Without it, nothing held. One evening, my mother called. "He came by the house," she said. My chest tightened. "What did he want?" "To ask questions," she replied. I told him nothing. "Did he seem suspicious?" "He seemed scared," she said after a pause. "Men like him don't scare easily." That night, I stood at the window of the studio apartment, watching traffic slide by like a slow river of light. Ethan slept in the next room, safe, dreaming of things that hadn't yet been complicated by adults. I wasn't angry anymore. I was precise. Marcus called again near midnight. "We're ready for phase 2, he said. "What's phase 2?" I asked. He hesitated. "We stop competing quietly." I closed my eyes. Daniel thrived on dominance, on the illusion that he was the only option. The moment clients saw a credible alternative, one he couldn't control, everything would change. "Do it," I said. The following week, Marcus's company landed its first major client, one Daniel had bragged about for years. Daniel exploded. He sent emails, made threats, accused people of betrayal. He couldn't understand how Marcus had come back from the dead. He couldn't understand how it was happening without money. That was the irony. It was happening because of money, just not his. Late one night, my phone rang. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I let it ring. Then I answered. "Rachel," he said, his voice tight, "I need to ask you something." "Yes," I said calmly. "You didn't help Marcus, did you?" I almost smiled. "Daniel," I replied softly, "you always said I didn't understand business." There was silence on the line. Then, very quietly, "You should be careful." I looked at my sleeping son, then back out at the city. "So should you," I said. I hung up, and for the first time, Daniel knew one thing for certain. I was no longer afraid of him. Daniel didn't sleep that night. I knew because he texted me at 3 in the morning. "You think you're smart," the message read. "You think you can play games with me." I stared at the screen for a long moment before turning the phone face down. I didn't respond. Silence had become my sharpest weapon. By morning, the tone had changed. "I just want to understand what's going on," he wrote. "We have a child together. We should be civil." Civil. The word almost made me laugh. That same day, Marcus sent me an update. "Daniel's auditors are nervous," he said. "He's asking questions he never asked before." That caught my attention. What kind of questions? The kind you ask when you're afraid something will be found. Daniel had always been sloppy in one way. He believed intimidation replaced precision. He bullied employees, rushed paperwork, signed things without reading when he felt powerful. Now that power was cracking, and fear makes people careless. 2 days later, I heard from someone I hadn't expected. Melissa Grant, Daniel's former accounting manager. She found me through a mutual contact and asked if we could talk. Just talk. Her message ended with, "I don't feel safe where I am." We met in a small diner off a quiet highway, the kind of place no one noticed. She kept checking the door, stirring the same cup of coffee over and over. "I shouldn't be doing this," she said, "but I can't sleep anymore." I didn't interrupt. "He made me change reports," she continued, "backdate entries, move money between accounts that didn't make sense. Every time I asked questions, he reminded me how replaceable I was." I nodded slowly. "You're not replaceable." She laughed weakly. "He made sure I felt like I was." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents Marcus had already uncovered, partial but enough to show patterns. Her face drained of color. "So you know," she whispered. "I know enough, but not everything." Melissa's hands trembled. "If I talk, he'll destroy me." I leaned forward. "He already tried. This is your chance to stop him from doing it again." She looked down at her coffee for a long time. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "This is everything," she said. "Backups, emails, real numbers. I kept them because something felt wrong." I didn't touch it yet. "Why give it to me?" "Because," she said, finally meeting my eyes, "because he thinks you're weak, and men like him always fall hardest when they're wrong." That night, I sat alone after Ethan fell asleep, the flash drive resting on the table like it weighed 1,000 pounds. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about truth. Daniel called again the next evening. His voice sounded strained. "Rachel, if you've heard things, you should tell me." "I've heard a lot over the years," I replied evenly. "You're letting people turn you against me," he snapped. "No," I said. "You did that yourself." There was a sharp inhale on the line. "You think this ends well for you?" I paused, then spoke carefully. "It already has." I hung up before he could respond. Outside, rain tapped against the window. Inside, my son slept peacefully, unaware of how close his father was to losing everything he'd built on lies. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and watched Daniel's world begin to unravel line by line. I didn't look at everything on the flash drive all at once. I couldn't. Some truths need to be taken in pieces, the way you step into cold water slowly so it doesn't shock your system. I opened one folder, then closed it, took a breath, opened another. What I saw confirmed everything Marcus suspected, and more. Fake losses reported to investors, money routed through shell companies, contracts altered after signatures, dates changed, entire accounts that existed only on paper. Daniel hadn't just bent the rules, he'd broken them repeatedly, confidently, for years. And he hadn't done it alone. Names appeared again and again. Vendors, consultants, a lawyer who signed off on things that should have raised alarms, people who benefited when Daniel looked successful and stayed quiet when he didn't. I copied everything. 3 backups, 1 encrypted, 1 physical, 1 stored where even I couldn't access it without help. Then I closed the laptop. The next move couldn't be rushed. Daniel, meanwhile, was spiraling. He showed up at Ethan's daycare unannounced one afternoon. I wasn't there, but the director called me immediately. "She was agitated," she said carefully, "asking questions about your schedule." That crossed the line. I picked Ethan up early that day and didn't take him back for a week. Routine was replaced with safety, parks farther away, different grocery stores, a different rhythm. Daniel texted nonstop. "You can't just disappear with my son. This is illegal. Answer me." I responded once. "He's safe. That's all you need to know." That answer infuriated him. 2 nights later, Marcus called. "He's trying to borrow," he said. "Everyone's saying no." Daniel's reputation was shifting, quietly but decisively. People who once laughed at his jokes now avoided his calls. Deals stalled. Meetings were canceled until further notice. He blamed Marcus. He blamed competitors. He never blamed himself. Melissa reached out again. "He's cleaning house," she said. "People are quitting. He's paranoid." "Has he asked about you?" I asked. "Yes," she said softly. "That's why I'm scared." I made a decision that night. I contacted an attorney, not for divorce. That chapter was closed. For protection. We met in a private office overlooking the city. I laid out only what was necessary, enough to show risk, enough to show intent. The attorney listened without interrupting, then leaned back. "This is serious and dangerous." "I know," I replied. "That's why I need to do it right." She nodded slowly. "If you move forward, there's no undoing it." I thought of Ethan, of the hallway outside Daniel's office, of the way he spoke about me like I was already gone. I'm not undoing anything. I'm finishing it. That same week, Daniel tried one last approach. He showed up where he knew I'd be, at a small playground near the river. I saw him before he saw me. His shoulders were tense, his eyes restless. "Rachel," he called when he spotted me, "we need to talk." I stayed where I was. I didn't move closer. "You've gone too far," he said, lowering his voice. "People are turning against me." "Funny," I replied calmly. "You said the same thing about me once." "This isn't a game," he snapped. "You don't know who you're messing with." I met his stare without blinking. "I know exactly who you are." For a moment, something ugly surfaced in his expression, something unmasked. Then he smiled. "You think you're protected," he said. "You're not." I picked up Ethan, cradling him against my shoulder. "Stay away from us," I said quietly. He laughed under his breath and walked away. I didn't watch him go. I was already moving on. That night, I sent one email, just one, with an attachment Daniel never existed, and pressed send. The moment it left my outbox, I felt it. Not fear, not triumph, relief, because the truth was no longer mine alone to carry, and Daniel's time was officially running out. The response didn't come immediately. That was the worst part. When you drop something heavy into still water, there's always a pause before the ripples show. I kept myself busy during that pause, packing Ethan's lunch, answering emails, listening to him tell me about the shapes of clouds like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. But inside, I was counting hours. 3 days later, Marcus called. "You might want to sit down," he said. "I'm listening." There's been a freeze. My fingers tightened around the phone. On what? Multiple accounts tied to Daniel's company. Vendors can't get paid. Payroll didn't clear this morning. I closed my eyes. A freeze meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant questions. And Daniel hated questions. "He knows?" I asked. "He knows something's wrong," Marcus replied. "He just doesn't know how bad yet." That evening, Daniel showed up again. This time, he didn't shout, he didn't threaten. He stood in the hallway of my building looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, like a man who'd lost his footing but hadn't hit the ground yet. "Rachel," he said quietly, "please." I didn't open the door. "You need to stop," he continued. "Whatever you're doing, it's gone too far." I leaned against the door, calm. "I'm not doing anything." "That's a lie," he snapped, the edge creeping back into his voice. "You're poisoning people against me." "I did that yourself," I said. "I just stopped protecting you." There was silence on the other side. Then, softer, almost pleading, "Think about Ethan." I closed my eyes at the sound of my son's name. "I am," I replied. "That's why this is happening." Daniel left without another word. The next morning, my attorney called. "They've opened a formal inquiry," she said. "Financial misconduct. It's early, but it's moving fast." "Will they contact me?" I asked. "Eventually," she said, "but right now they're following the money." That was when I understood something important. This was no longer about Daniel versus me. This was about Daniel versus the truth. At work, what little remained of it, his world was collapsing. Employees resigned, his office lease was flagged, a supplier filed a claim to recover losses. One crack exposed another. Melissa texted me late that night. "He's blaming everyone," she wrote. I typed back, "Are you safe?" "Yes," she replied, "for now." I stared at the screen, thinking of how many people had been trapped by his confidence, how many had stayed silent because it was easier than fighting. I refused to be one of them. 2 days later, Marcus sent one final message before going quiet. "They're coming." I didn't ask who. I already knew. That afternoon, I was walking Ethan home when my phone buzzed with a news alert. Local business executive under investigation for financial irregularities. They hadn't named him yet, but they would. I watched my son hop along the sidewalk carefree, counting cracks like they were treasures. I reached down and took his hand. Whatever came next, I was ready. Because the moment Daniel underestimated me, he'd already lost. He just hadn't heard the verdict yet. The knock came early the next morning. Not on my door, on his. I didn't know it yet, of course. I was making Ethan breakfast, listening to him argue with his cereal about which pieces were the strongest, when my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Marcus. It wasn't Melissa. It was Daniel. I let it ring. Again. And again. Then the messages started coming in, one after another, each shorter than the last. "Rachel, answer me. They're here. You did this." I turned the phone face down and poured milk into Ethan's bowl. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I had imagined this moment so many times, imagined shaking, imagined panic, but none of that came. What I felt was distance. Later that day, the news finally used his name. The headline was everywhere, online, on TV screens in cafes, on the radio playing softly in the background of the grocery store while I stood in line with Ethan. Daniel Carter, under federal investigation, financial fraud, asset concealment. People stared at their phones, shook their heads, whispered. No one looked at me. That anonymity was my greatest protection. By afternoon, Melissa called me in tears. "They took everything," she said. "Computers, files, phones." "Did you tell them the truth?" I asked. "Yes," she said, "all of it." "That's enough," I replied. "You did the right thing." She exhaled shakily. "He kept saying your name, asking why you would do this to him." I closed my eyes. Because even now, he still thought this was personal. Daniel was released that evening. Not charged, not yet. Just watched, restricted. His accounts frozen, his movements limited. The kind of freedom that feels more like a leash. He came straight to me. This time I opened the door, but I didn't let him in. He looked terrible, his suit wrinkled, his eyes red, his confidence gone. "You won," he said hoarsely. "Is that what you wanted?" I studied him for a moment, the man I'd once loved, the man who'd spoken about me like I was disposable. "I didn't win. You exposed yourself." He stepped closer. "You think they'll stop with me? You think this won't touch you?" "It already has," I replied calmly, "and I survived." His voice dropped. "Tell them to stop." I almost laughed. "I can't," I said. "I never started it." For the first time, he looked afraid. Not angry, not arrogant. Afraid. "Think about Ethan," he whispered. "I do, every day. That's why I'm standing here instead of begging." He swallowed hard. "You don't know what you've done." "I know exactly what I've done. I chose truth over silence." I closed the door gently. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me and asked, "Mommy, why were you sad before?" I brushed his hair back. "Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes." "Did you fix it?" he asked sleepily. I kissed his forehead. "I'm fixing it." Outside, the city hummed like always, but somewhere across town, Daniel sat alone, realizing something too late. He had built his entire life on lies, and lies don't protect you when the truth finally shows up. The silence after that was loud. Daniel stopped calling. No texts, no surprise appearances, no threats disguised as concern. It was as if he had vanished from my life overnight, and in his place was a hollow space that no longer hurt, but demanded attention. Because silence like that never means peace. It means strategy. A week later, my attorney called me into her office. Her tone was calm, professional, but there was an edge to it that told me this wasn't routine. "He's filed a civil suit," she said. I nodded slowly. I had been waiting for this. "On what grounds?" "Marital assets," she replied. "He is claiming you concealed significant financial information during the marriage." Of course he was. The moment he realized he couldn't intimidate the system, he turned to entitlement. "He wants money," I said. "He wants control," she corrected gently. "Money is just the language he uses." I didn't panic. I didn't argue. I reached into my bag and handed her a folder. She opened it, skimmed the first few pages, then looked up at me with a different expression entirely. "Where did you get this?" "I listened," I said, "and I kept records." The folder contained copies of the divorce agreement, the timestamps, the clauses he himself had insisted on. Full custody to me, No shared assets, no claims, no future obligations. He had wanted me gone so badly that he had signed away everything without hesitation. My attorney leaned back and exhaled slowly. "This," she said, tapping the folder, "is airtight." Outside the courtroom, Daniel's narrative was already falling apart. People who once avoided the topic now talked freely. Former employees shared stories. Vendors came forward. Even acquaintances who had defended him before were suddenly distancing themselves, afraid to be associated with what was unraveling. And then came the subpoena. Not for me, for him. He called that night, voice shaking, stripped of every ounce of arrogance. "They want testimony," he said. "They want records I don't have anymore." I didn't answer right away. "Rachel," he whispered, "please, I'll do anything." Anything. The word tasted bitter. "I already told you, this isn't in my hands." "You're lying," he snapped, desperation creeping in. "You planned this." "I prepared for it," I replied. "There's a difference." He started crying then, full, broken sobs, the kind I'd never heard from him before. "I'm going to lose everything," he said. I thought of the hallway, the office door, his laugh. "I know," I said. The call ended without goodbye. A few days later, I was called in, not as a defendant, not as a suspect, but as a witness. I walked into that room calm, composed, holding nothing but the truth. No embellishments, no revenge, just facts, timelines, documentation. They asked questions. I answered. And with every answer, Daniel's story collapsed a little more. That evening, I took Ethan for a walk along the river. The sun was low, painting the water gold. He ran ahead, laughing, chasing birds that took off just before he reached them. "Mommy," called Ethan, "watch this." I watched him spin in circles, free and careless, and felt something settle deep in my chest. This was never about destroying a man. It was about ending a lie. And the truth, once spoken, doesn't need force. It just needs time. The trial didn't happen all at once. That's something no one tells you. Justice doesn't arrive like a storm. It comes like erosion, slow, quiet, relentless. Piece by piece, Daniel's life was being worn down, not by me, but by his own choices catching up with him. The formal charges came 3 weeks later. Wire fraud, financial misrepresentation, tax violations. When I saw his name listed in black and white on the court docket, I felt nothing. No triumph, no anger, just distance, like reading about someone I used to know in another lifetime. Daniel didn't come to court looking like a man ready to fight. He came looking like a man already defeated. His shoulders slumped, his hair unkempt. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Daniel barely reacted. He kept scanning the room until his eyes landed on me. For a second, something flickered there. Hope, maybe. I didn't look away. I didn't glare. I simply existed, calm and unmoved. That seemed to hurt him more than anything. The prosecution laid everything out carefully. The shell companies, the altered records, the money trails that contradicted every claim he'd ever made about being on the brink of bankruptcy. Each document felt like a nail, precise and unavoidable. When Melissa testified, her voice shook, but she didn't back down. "I was instructed to falsify reports," she said, repeatedly. Daniel stared at the table. Marcus testified next. "I built that company," he said steadily, "and I was pushed out with lies." The courtroom was silent. When it was my turn, I stood without hesitation. I wasn't there as a victim. I wasn't there as an avenger. I was there as a witness to the truth. They asked me about the divorce, about the agreement, about whether I had been coerced or deceived. "Yes," I said simply, "I was." Daniel's lawyer tried one last move. He suggested I was motivated by bitterness, that I'd orchestrated everything out of spite. I didn't raise my voice. I stayed silent until I was no longer safe, I said. There's a difference. That ended it. By the end of the day, Daniel was taken into custody pending further proceedings, not handcuffed dramatically, not dragged away, just escorted. That night, I went home, cooked dinner, helped Ethan with a puzzle, and read him his favorite book twice because he asked. Later, when the apartment was quiet, my phone buzzed. A single message. It never crossed my mind you'd be capable of this. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Because he was right. Neither had I. Weeks passed. Daniel was convicted. The sentence was announced on a gray morning I didn't attend. I read about it later while sitting on a park bench, Ethan asleep beside me, his head heavy against my arm. Several years. Enough time to matter. I looked up at the sky and felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not relief, closure. That evening, I called my mother. "It's over," I said. She was quiet for a moment, then softly, "I'm proud of you." I watched my son sleep, safe and untouched by the wreckage behind us. And for the first time since that hallway outside Daniel's office, I allowed myself to believe this chapter was ending, not with fire, but with truth. And truth, once it's finished its work, leaves space for something new. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that. It became quiet. The kind of quiet that feels unfamiliar at first, like your ears are still ringing from a noise that's already gone. For a long time, I kept expecting something else to fall apart. Another call, another threat, another surprise. None came. Daniel was gone. Not just physically, but socially. His name stopped appearing in conversations. His former colleagues avoided mentioning him. The city moved on, the way it always does, efficiently and without sentiment. That's when the rebuilding began. Not the dramatic kind people imagine. No sudden transformations, no headlines, just small, deliberate choices stacking on top of each other. I moved Ethan and myself into a new place near the water. Nothing flashy, just sunlight in the mornings and a park close enough that he could ride his bike without me holding my breath. I enrolled him in a new school where no one knew our past, where he was just another kid with paint on his hands and endless questions. I went back to work, but on my terms. Not for survival, not to prove anything, because I wanted to. I took classes, learned things I'd never had time for before. I met people who didn't see me as someone's wife or someone's problem, just me. Marcus and I stayed in contact, though our roles changed. His company stabilized, slowly, honestly. He sent updates less often, not because things were wrong, but because they no longer needed constant attention. One afternoon, he called me unexpectedly. "They offered to buy us out," he said. I smiled. "And?" He replied, "Not yet." That told me everything I needed to know. Ethan grew. Children have a way of pulling you forward whether you're ready or not. He learned to swim, to read on his own, to ask questions that stopped me in my tracks. "Mom," he asked one evening, "why don't we see Daddy anymore?" I took a breath. I'd practiced this answer. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "grown-ups make choices that mean they can't be part of our lives in the way we need them to be." He thought about that. Did he make a bad choice? "Yes," I said softly. Ethan nodded once. "Okay." And that was it. No anger, no confusion, just acceptance. That night, after he fell asleep, I stood on the balcony and watched the lights reflect on the water. I realized something then. I wasn't carrying the story anymore. It had loosened its grip on me. Daniel had taken years of my life, my silence, my trust, my certainty. but he hadn't taken my future. And that future, quiet, steady, earned, was finally mine. Not because I won, but because I survived. Time has a strange way of reshaping memories. What once felt sharp slowly loses its edge. What once defined you becomes a chapter instead of the whole book. I noticed it one afternoon when I realized I couldn't remember the sound of Daniel's voice without trying. That's when I knew I was free. Ethan was 7 by then, taller, louder, full of opinions about everything from dinosaurs to which socks were unlucky. Our routines had become solid, dependable. Mornings were calm, nights were peaceful. The chaos that once lived in my chest had long since moved out. Marcus visited once that spring. We met at a cafe overlooking the river, sunlight pouring through the windows. He looked different, too. Healthier, steadier. Success hadn't hardened him. If anything, it had softened the edges that betrayal once carved into him. "We're expanding," he said, stirring his coffee. Slowly, carefully. I nodded. That's how it should be. He hesitated, then smiled. "You know, none of this would have happened if you hadn't walked away when you did." "I didn't walk away," I said. "I stepped forward." He raised his cup in quiet agreement. That evening, I attended a small event. Nothing formal, just a gathering of people sharing their stories. I hadn't planned to speak. I almost left early. But then a woman stood up. She talked about staying silent because she thought endurance was strength, about shrinking herself to keep peace, about waking up one day and realizing she didn't recognize who she'd become. I stood up before I could talk myself out of it. "I used to think silence meant safety," I said, my voice steady. "But sometimes it's the most dangerous place to stay. No names, no details, just truth." Afterward, women approached me quietly. No questions, just gratitude in their eyes. Recognition. That mattered more than anything I'd gained. Later that night, Ethan asked why I'd been smiling so much. "I remembered who I am," I told him. He grinned. "You're my mom." "Yes," I said, "that too." News of Daniel surfaced once more that year. A short article, a denied appeal, a line at the bottom of a page no one lingered on. I didn't read past the headline. I didn't need to. Some endings don't require witnesses. Standing by the water that night, the city breathing around me, I felt something settle fully into place. Not victory, peace. And peace, I had learned, was the rarest kind of success. I didn't plan a grand ending for my life. That's something movies get wrong. Real closure doesn't come with music swelling or crowds applauding. It comes quietly, often when you're not looking for it. For me, it came on an ordinary afternoon. Ethan and I were at the park, the same one near the water we'd visited for years. He was running ahead of me, laughing, his voice carrying across the grass. Taller now, faster, confident in a way that told me he felt safe in the world. I sat on a bench and watched him, and it hit me. Nothing was chasing us anymore. No court dates, no threats, no shadows. Just a mother watching her son grow. I thought back to the woman I used to be, the one who believed love meant endurance, the one who thought silence was protection, the one who stood outside an office door holding a secret worth millions, terrified and shaking. She felt like someone I once knew, not someone I still was. I hadn't rebuilt my life to prove anything. I hadn't stayed strong to make a point. I did it because I had no other choice. And somewhere along the way, that necessity turned into power. Marcus sent me a message later that week, a short one. We finalized the expansion. Clean books, clean growth. I smiled and put the phone down. Ethan ran over and dropped onto the bench beside me, out of breath. "Mom," he said, "did you see that jump?" I saw it. It was amazing. He leaned against me, sweaty and happy, and I wrapped an arm around his shoulders. In that moment, I knew something with absolute certainty. This was the real ending. Not prison sentences, not money, not revenge. Freedom. Freedom to wake up without fear. Freedom to raise my child without shrinking myself. Freedom to exist without asking permission. If you're listening to this and you feel trapped, if you're silent because you think you're powerless, if someone has convinced you that you're small, replaceable, or nothing without them, let me tell you something I learned the hard way. The moment someone underestimates you is the moment you gain the advantage. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to rush. You just have to choose yourself. And if this story moved you even a little, don't let it end here. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Because stories like this don't just entertain, they remind us who we can become.